All right, welcome back to the Warrior Arts Renaissance Show, where you give us hard questions and we give you solid answers. My name is Dr. Philip Payne. I am your host for the week. Before I get started, I just want to give a shout out to Mr. Lyndon Fox. I actually met Lyndon for the first time this weekend. He is a personal student now of Shashi Raymond Pridgeon, who is a veteran of this podcast, has been on several episodes. He's my Kung Fu instructor, and made a trip over to Lawrenceville, Illinois this past Sunday. Got to sit on a testing panel for Mr. Fox, who is well on his way now to got his promotion. He's well on his way to being the next generation in Tomoshi Kung Fu. With that said, I'm going to move into answering some questions that have been sent in. First off, I had a question about the website Bullshido. If you've never heard of Bullshido, it is an interesting thing to check out. I have mixed feelings about Bullshido, and the individual who wrote the question told me some of his experiences. I'm not going to go into those particularly, for the simple fact that by doing that, some of what he shared was some of his experiences on the forum part of that website, and I wouldn't want to cause him any more trouble than what he's having. And by what I mean by that is Bullshido in a lot of ways functions as a place where martial artists, in my opinion, many of them keyboard warriors being people who like to sit behind the keyboard and behind the computer and criticize people who are actually trying to do martial arts. And call them out on supposedly their shortcomings. I say supposedly because although as far as I know, I have never been the target of anyone on Bullshido. I might be after this. But I've seen, granted, I've seen them call out some pretty bad losers and call them what they were and reveal some seriously phony and fake individuals. And I suppose that's a good thing because buyer beware, and they can best beware if they got the facts. I've also seen them pretty much ruin the careers of some really good martial artists that I personally knew. I personally knew their pedigrees, but because they came from some very old school dojos that didn't necessarily document everything. Your teacher said you were this rank, so you were that rank. It's actually, I've trained in schools that way. My jiu-jitsu rank is exactly that way. I was a white belt until I was a black belt. That's how it was in that school. I was a black belt student until I was an instructor, until I was a master. Some people have a lot of problem with that. But depending upon who your teacher is, you may or may not get a fancy certificate like a lot of programs do today. Back in the day, that just wasn't done. And so if sometimes you got people on there or out there in the world claiming to be things that they're not. Sometimes you got people claiming just what their teachers said they were. And I've had that problem at times with people questioning it, not the Bullshido people, but I've also seen them, specifically that website, tear some really good martial artists' professional careers as instructors, just rip it to shreds, because they seem to operate on the you don't have paper documentation, therefore you're not for real mindset. So my thoughts on Bullshido. Really good premise of wanting to protect people from phonies. Sometimes not so good application of that premise. I think there needs to be some better moderating, some better policing of how that is done. So the individual writing in said some things, and like I said, I don't want to reveal that person has come to me because they might get more heat than what they're getting now. And what I'm going to say is this: whether or not whether or not your claims are true. Okay, your teacher knows whether or not your claims are true. If you've been teaching for any length of time, your students know whether or not your claims are true, whether you can do the things you say you can do. And at the end of the day, that's really what matters. Your pedigree, it's nice to have. I like to be able to say that I trained with this person who trained with this person who trained with this person all the way back to, founder of system, what have you. That's great. But at the end of the day, your students aren't paying to train with the founder of the system. They're paying to train with you. So if what you're doing is real, keep doing it. If not, do something else. I don't put a whole lot of stock into forums because, just like Bullshido, a whole lot of them are witch hunts by people who aren't even out there training or should be training more than they are, and instead they're on the websites. So that's my take on that. So next question comes from a gentleman who says that he went to his school and introduced himself, got to know the teacher a little bit, and was told that in the system there are 500 forms. He wrote in saying that he thought that was a little excessive and a little overwhelming, and he wanted to know if there were any systems out there that he might want to look into that have fewer forms than 500 that he has to learn. Let me tell you something. I have been training in the martial arts very seriously for 33 years, and I don't know 500 forms. Okay? I think this guy is, whoever this instructor is feeding you a load of baloney. And I say whoever it is, I'm being polite. I know who it is or I know the name of the person. Don't know them personally, but I know the name of the instructor that has supposedly said this. In the jiu-jitsu system that I teach, as I learned it, there are the composites of 21 not even forms, 21 drills within a set, and there are 7 sets. What is that? It's 147 techniques, and that's a huge amount. Okay, that's more than a lifetime study. Because the system has been added to and added to and added to over the years, it's still a very living system. In the Kali system that I teach, there are exactly 8 fighting methods and 1 drill for each method. Each of the drills takes about 3 seconds to do. But if you do them, if you learn the logical progressions, it's all you ever need. My son has black belts in multiple styles with me. Has trained in everything that I do, from Okinawan karate to China Kung Fu, and he does the Kali system. That's his core. That's his go-to. Those 8 movements, 8 drills that teach basic movements, and they're very quick and they're very practical. The Okinawan karate system that I primarily teach, I actually do 3 karate systems, but I have a master's grade in 1. It's Yoshiko Tegumi. There are 4 forms, and you learn them 2 ways. You learn them soft, and then you learn them hard. That's it. And any one of those forms is a system unto itself. You can learn it soft, learn it hard, and it's all you need. Okay? Each one of them is something that a master took and put together and basically perfected the system as far as perfecting it for himself. 500 forms? No way. In the entire, if you take everything, and I've mapped this out in a spreadsheet, if you take everything I teach, every movement, every hand form, every principle, every concept, there's like 400 of them. Okay? And that's in all the systems that I teach put together. 500 forms, just not seeing it. And I think there's probably a lot of wasted repetition where you can learn the technique in 1 form. You don't have to do it 50 times in 50 different forms. Is sparring in a weapon-based martial arts practical? Absolutely. Go back and look at and listen to last week's podcast, Armored Combat, and I think it was subtitled "Taking Your Training to a Whole New Level" or something like that. But it's last week's. I think this is like episode 16 for the season. So go back and look at number 15, and it'll give you a really interesting take on that. But even without doing the armored combat, any weapons system I've ever trained in, once you get to a certain point, you have to do, you can call it sparring. You have to do some sort of real practical training where you have the weapon, they have the weapon, or as I learned Kali, it started out, neither of us had weapons, and then he had a weapon and I had none, and then I had a weapon, but he had two, and you work your way up in Jitsu, the sword art that I trained in. You have to prove to your master that you can use the techniques of the form practically before you move on to the next one. The only way to do that is to, as you say, spar with someone with a weapon. Man with woman versus four. This is a scenario that someone apparently had shown to them in a school. They want to know if it's practical. Or if you're talking about training this way with your fellow students, probably not. And the reason I say this is these days, if you are a student in a school and you're training with other students in the school, the likelihood of you having those students with you to have your back in a fight is pretty slim. This is not the Karate Kid. We don't run around in martial arts gangs. At least we shouldn't be. But if you're talking about the principle of training with people that you will be with, it's very, very practical. If training to defend against a home invasion with your family, if they're also training in the art or you're teaching them self-defense stuff, why not? We do it in firearms training. Okay, we practice room clearing as couples, as room clearing as families. If you're talking about empty hand or handheld weapons, knife self-defense or what have you, if you want to train for if you're on the street and you get surrounded and how to react together instead of as just separate individuals, I think that's very practical. I've not thought about doing the empty hand or knife martial arts training that way, but I think it's a very good idea. And since it was brought up and I'm thinking about it now, it's something I may do down the road. What's the difference between a do art and a jitsu art? A lot of people are going to have different answers for this. Okay, so I'm going to get very basic, and then you can go do some research because there's a lot to look at on this. But a do is a way, and a jitsu or a jutsu is a method. I do jujitsu. I don't do judo. I do the arts that I prefer are jitsu arts, not do arts. Jitsu arts tend to lean more toward real world practicality of the technique. They're philosophical, but the core is combat. Okay, do arts tend to be more philosophical. And the techniques tend to be more, in my opinion, my experience, watered down. That's like I said, that's just me looking at what I've seen, and the history and the do arts didn't exist until after the samurai class was dissolved, and some of the former samurai wanted to make money, and they started converting their jitsu into do. Okay, and so they started teaching a philosophical application of the old systems. I'm not saying that jitsu arts are more or better than do arts. I'm saying I prefer the jitsu arts. I know people who prefer the do arts. There's nothing wrong with that. People say, well, what about Jeet Kune Do? Is that a watered down system? No, that's taking a Chinese term, do, that has a different application. That is, I'm not going to say Bruce Lee didn't know his history, didn't know what he was doing. I'm saying he was talking about a philosophical method of perfecting your fighting art. And that's a little different application than what is traditionally seen as a do art. Um, so take that for what it's worth. There's probably 50 websites out there that'll disagree with me, if not more. Guru Dan Inosanto, is he for real? Yes. And that should really be all I need to say. Well, I was just talking about Bruce Lee. Most people would say Bruce Lee is the greatest martial artist of modern times. Some people would argue, but not many. Dan Inosanto was literally Bruce Lee's right-hand man. Okay? People specifically want to question his Filipino martial arts. I don't like a lot of Guru Inosanto's Filipino systems. I think it's too complex. I think it's too flashy. Um, but if you watch the man do it, he can flat do it. I'm just not that skilled. I have to keep it simple. The Kali system that I teach, I said earlier, has 8 fighting methods. Any more than that, I'm getting confused. Dan Inosanto, phenomenal with 100 fighting methods. But most people aren't Dan Inosanto. Most people I know who do his system actually do fragments of it in their actual application, because most of us aren't him. Is he for real? Absolutely. You can't legitimately take anything away from Dan Inosanto as far as he himself being able to do the things he teaches. I've tried not learning directly from him, but learning from one of his students, and actually 2 of his students over the years, and I just can't do his stuff. It's just not for me. If you can, by all means, go learn it, because the man can flat do it. Do pressure points work? Wow. Yes. I sometimes questions get asked and they're so matter of fact, closed-ended questions that I almost have to open the ending to even make it worth bringing on here. I started training in Kyusho-jitsu, the art of 1-second fighting, when I was 15 years old. It was not my first system, and I think that's why it works for me. When I see Kyusho-jitsu not work for people, it's usually because it's their first system, and people don't understand that Kyusho-jitsu, as phenomenal as it is supposed to be an internal aspect of any other art. Okay, I don't care what you do. I don't care if it's striking, grappling. I don't care what you do combatively in the martial arts. If you study Kyusho-jitsu, it's going to make you better. If you're a healer, it's also going to make you better as a healer. But being a healer will also make you better at Kyusho-jitsu. And if you go on and train in other fine-tuned attack arts like Chin-A, people are like, wow, you rose to the ranks in Chin-A pretty fast. Yes, I did. But it's because I spent 20-some years, almost 30 years studying Kyusho-jitsu and the subset in Kyusho-jitsu of Tuite, which is a grappling pressure point art. And so when I got into Jiu-Jitsu and then later into Chin-A, I advanced in those systems much more quickly because I was already pinpointing, and I'm throwing that in there because there is actually a pinpoint pressure point system that was developed by a good friend of mine and instructor of mine, Grandmaster Mark Klein. That if you really want to know what what it is to do these things, come train with me. Be glad to teach it to you. But there are 2 other men in this world who are phenomenally better than me, who I would also recommend that you train with, which is one of them being Grandmaster Klein, also Grandmaster Jim Korn. I hope to have them both on this podcast sometime in the near future, either together or one at a time. I'm not sure how it's going to work out yet. But absolutely, if you know what you're doing with it, and if you have the form style to put the Kyusho-jitsu into, That's a key, because if all you're studying is hit this point, hit this point, hit this point, it's probably not going to work for you, because you have to learn the Tai Sabaki stuff. You have to learn the body movement. You have to learn the flow of combat, and you have to learn how to do entering and passing, and you have to learn how to get a good hold. And then the Kyusho-jitsu is going to make whatever you're doing 1,000 times better, I guarantee you. But if you try to do just Kyusho-jitsu, in my opinion, from what I have seen, it will fail you, not because it's not a good system, not because it's not good knowledge, but because you don't have the other aspect. That's my opinion. Other people will disagree and say, "Oh no, you can do just Kyushu-jitsu and it's great. It's an art unto itself." I would say yes, it is, but it's more of the science that makes the art that you're doing better. That's all the time I have for this week. We've actually gone overtime, um, but I want to just thank you for joining us, and I will talk to you next week.